Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about another problem in Star Trek which was considered to be a continuity mistake, but I actually think because it has a very easy explanation, I don't really view it as a continuity mistake. The problem started in the original Star Trek show when Spock was asked about how his planet looks like at night when the full moon is in the sky, and he replied that Vulcan has no moon. And yet since then we saw Vulcan having what looks like moons in the sky in both the animated show and in the first Star Trek movie, the motion picture. In the first version of that movie we saw what looks like moons in the sky. That version of the movie was later changed, I guess, to look more natural because it was a bit odd that it appears to be daytime on the surface and yet the sky is so clearly visible as if it's nighttime, or as if the planet has no atmosphere at all, and so that looked really weird. And after they fixed it, it looked a lot more natural and also matching how the planet looked like in later Star Trek movies and shows. And so overall I think it was a good change, but they totally removed those other objects in the sky, and I think that image was kind of cool. I do like that idea of having multiple stellar objects in the sky of a planet because it's much more beautiful than just having one small moon or no moon. It also reminds me of that scene in Avatar. One of my favorite special effects shots in the whole movie was when they show them running up some giant tree, and you could see that massive gas giant in the background of it kind of being vague because of the atmosphere. So that looks so beautiful. That makes me wish our planet was like that, to have multiple moons or being a moon ourselves and to orbiting a bigger planet and seeing other moons, and that could have been so epic, so beautiful. And so I think maybe they should have kept it for that scene, maybe add the atmosphere but still keep those other objects in the sky, simply because it looks better. And how can we explain that line in the original Star Trek show? I guess because they changed that scene in the movie, the original version of it is not considered canon anymore, so technically it solves the problem, and also the animated show is not exactly considered canon, even though it's kind of controversial, so technically there is no problem, there is no continuity issue, at least until now, because now when they showed Vulcan in Star Trek Discovery, we do see those other planets in the sky once again, which do look kind of similar to that original version in the motion picture, meaning we see what looks like another planet in the sky with a smaller moon orbiting it. It looked really similar to the motion picture when we saw it in season 1 of Discovery, and now in season 2 we once again see what looks like a moon, but if you look closely you can see there is a smaller moon orbiting what I now think is a different planet close by, not really a moon. When I first thought about coming up with an explanation, I thought maybe we can say that Vulcan itself is a moon of a bigger planet, but then I realized it wouldn't work because Vulcan is specifically referred to as a planet in many episodes in which they say directly the planet Vulcan, and so we cannot say that Vulcan itself is a moon of another planet, but maybe we can say that Vulcan has sister planets which are in very close orbit to it. And so they would not technically be a moon, and therefore Spock was right in his statement in the original series. So maybe Vulcan simply has other planets which are in very close orbits, and maybe they are not orbiting each other, they are both orbiting the sun, but the orbits are very close together, so I guess it's like a very compact solar system. And if we look closely at that original version of the motion picture, it appears as if there are two planets in two different sides of Vulcan, because in this side we see this massive planet in the sky with what appears to be a smaller moon, but then in the other side of the scene we see a more distant planet which looks smaller with also a smaller moon, and so it seems as if it's not just one sister planet but at least two of them, and each of those has its own moon apparently. And that's also very similar to what we saw in Star Trek Discovery. This scene is from episode 6 in season 1 of Discovery, and in season 2 of Discovery we have the scene of Michael and Spock when they were kids, and if you look at the sky there appears to be a much smaller planet with a moon orbiting it, and so it doesn't really look like the same planet we saw in the previous scene. And so I actually think that Star Trek Discovery is kind of paying homage to that original version of Vulcan that we saw in the motion picture, a few different planets which are visible in the sky of Vulcan, and it also matches what we saw in the animated show when we saw what appears to be a very big planet in the sky, and it even matches what we saw in Star Trek 2009, and we see that Spock was looking at the sky and we could clearly see Vulcan getting destroyed. And since Vulcan has no moon, then this has to be a close by planet in a very close orbit. Now I think it's very possible, even likely, that all these planets cannot be so close together all the time, meaning they don't stay in this distance constantly when they orbit their sun, and instead the orbits are moving in different speeds, and only once in a while all the planets are in close proximity to each other, and therefore it's a very rare event. It's not something that happens every day, or maybe not even once a year, maybe only once every few years you have this collection of planets that you can see in the sky all at once. And that can explain why we didn't see any of these planets in all the other versions of Vulcan that we did see in other movies, since these objects are not always visible from Vulcan. And so I actually think what Star Trek Discovery did is kind of cool, because they kind of neatly tied together all the things, all these contradictions we saw before. Instead of simply ignoring them, they actually do take these things and play with them, and they show the same thing here. And I don't view it as a continuity mistake, because that original line by Spock was correct, because if technically these are not moons, if they are not orbiting Vulcan, and they are instead different planets, then that's okay. And because it's not something that is often seen in the sky, then it also makes sense with the dialogue of that scene with Uhura, because Uhura was asking him how the sky in Vulcan looks like, but if this is a very rare occasion, then it's not really something he would brag about. He would not tell her, we don't have a moon, we have a different planet in the sky. He wouldn't really brag about it, well, because he's a Vulcan, but also because it's probably a rare event. Maybe it only happens once every few years that you see these other planets in the sky when they pass close to each other in their orbits. And so I don't really view any of it as a continuity mistake, and actually I think it's kind of cool that Vulcan has this unique looking sky which is constantly changing, and sometimes you can see these giant planets in the sky. I think it looks really cool, just like that scene in Avatar, which is one of my favorite shots of the whole movie. And so I wouldn't actually mind seeing that on Vulcan more often, and maybe they can explain it in dialogue. And it would also fix the problem of Star Trek 2009, when we saw Spock on a totally separate planet and yet apparently able to see Vulcan. And they even refer to that planet as Delta Vega, which was a planet in the original series which was on the edge of the galaxy, so it cannot possibly be the same place. And I guess that was a deliberate homage to the original series, but I think purist fans like me only get pissed off by stuff like that, because now we have to explain why two different planets have the same exact name. Maybe the computer on that escape pod was messed up. Maybe Spock deliberately scrambled the information on that pod so that Kirk won't be able to get out of there or something. So I guess we can come up with theories like that. And some people try to explain away any continuity problem in those movies by saying it's a different timeline, and I say to that, but it still cannot explain why planets are different. Like, you can explain away historic events being different and characters being different, but you cannot change the planets around simply because someone changed the past 20 years earlier. It's not enough of an excuse to explain stuff like that. So I wish they would have called that planet something else, but maybe that was simply the Starfleet designation of it. Maybe it does have some Vulcan name to it, which would make sense if it's a sister planet. So I think that's the best explanation, that all these planets we see in the sky of Vulcan are not actually moons. They are planets in very close orbits to each other, kind of like Romulus and Remus, which we saw in Star Trek Nemesis, which were planets in very close orbit to each other. They were not orbiting each other, by the way. Some other guy on YouTube made a video claiming they are orbiting each other. That is not the case, because we saw in a different scene in Nemesis a diagram showing their orbits, and they seem to be in close orbits to each other, but not orbiting each other, and so they cannot be called the moons of each other. And so I think it's the same way with Vulcan. It's one planet among a few planets which at least once in a while come very close to each other in their orbits, probably not permanently, because that would cause a lot of problems on the planet. So I think they only pass each other close by once in a while, and that also explains why we don't normally see them. So this is something I actually liked in Star Trek Discovery. It reminds me of what they did with the Klingon blood, because they showed that some of the Klingons have purple blood, and I don't actually mind that because it fits what we saw in Star Trek 6, and therefore I kind of appreciate that callback. I kind of appreciate it's like their attempt to tie things together, and I find it kind of neat to do that, and I only wish there would be some kind of explanation for that, to directly explain why the Klingon blood sometimes looks red and sometimes purple. If it's somehow explained, then I would appreciate that. If not, I guess I will have to come up with my own theory to explain it. And so the same thing here with the planets in the Vulcan sky, which I think looks great. Maybe some astrophysics guys will have a problem with that, saying that it's impossible for planets to be so close by. I think it is possible. We simply need to explain it away. We simply need to invent such a solar system in which it would be possible. Maybe, I don't know, put two different gas giants on both sides of it to balance all the forces out so that it would make sense, and that's it. So if you have a problem with that, then let's come up with theories to try to explain it. Let's invent, let's say, gas giants which are more distant and less visible, which balance out this whole system so that it will work, because I actually think it looks cool, so I wouldn't mind seeing that. So that's my thoughts on this topic. I hope I explained it well. Let me know what you think in the comments below and we can discuss it in the comments section, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye.